how Google takes the pain out of code reviews with 97% dev satisfaction. A study of Google's code review tooling, which is called Critique, AI-powered improvements, and recent statistics. So Critique is something I'm actually pretty familiar with. I used it while I was working at Google. It is the way that Google does like code reviews. It's mainly for code reviews. Critique is not something that's isolated. It is a part of the entire developer tool chain at Google. There are other tools that kind of work with it. So it's not something you can just kind of isolate. In GitHub, there are code review UIs and like GitLab as well, and they're kind of tied to Git. It's similar when it comes to Google. Google does not use Git. They use something called Fig, I think it was called. A lot of ex-Googlers talk about how much they miss Critique, Google's code review tool, out of all the internal tools they leave behind. So I guess this is a Twitter screenshot. Tools that they missed: Critique for code reviews, Blaze, and others. And I guess what I will add to that list is another one called Code Search. It's basically a way of like traversing like massive code bases and searching over them, or searching over Google 3, the sort of mono repo at Google, which includes pretty much the source code of everything, whether it's like YouTube, Gmail, Google Cloud, which is what I worked on. That's honestly what I miss the most. I miss Code Search, probably because I don't do code reviews. I mostly work by myself, but Critique was also very, very powerful. People talk a lot about there's some magic going on at Google, and for the most part, there's not like super insane things. Open source tools are ahead of Google in some places, especially when it comes to front-end development. Like Angular isn't really cutting edge these days. Certain tools are just superior at Google, and it kind of is mind-boggling that there aren't open source equivalents to these, and I guess Critique is one of them, so we'll be learning about that. Reddit comments lament about how much they miss these. It's attention set. I could kind of explain some of these, but this article will probably do a better job of explaining them. In terms of satisfaction, 97% of engineers at Google are satisfied with Critique. That is pretty reasonable. I would think that the couple percent that aren't maybe are just not used to it yet, because it really is the type of tool that can't be much better. The UI is so clean, it auto suggests a lot of things for you. So if I had to give my rating, I'd say 100% I was satisfied with using Critique. It made things so easy. It's the type of tool that even if you were an intern, you had never done a code review in your life before. You'd never used GitHub for pull requests or anything like that. If you were an intern, you were using Critique, it was so easy. It was so intuitive. You'd be able to use it pretty much on your first try. But what exactly is it? How does this pair with Google's actual process of code reviews? In this article, we'll dive into the guidelines for efficient code reviews, their Critique and their code review tooling, and AI-powered improvements. I might not be super familiar with these if they were added over the last year. Internal statistics on Google code reviews, and why Critique seems to be so loved. If you are, I guess, early in your career or haven't even maybe started a job or an internship, this is probably something that's worth understanding for you. While the SWE book covers the basics of critiques, new blog posts and research by Google shows new development in their code review process. Okay, so I guess the person writing this article probably did not work at Google, so that's kind of why they are relying on just like public things. I'll try to like give my thoughts as well. I probably can't share super detailed stuff, so we'll mainly be going by the article, but I'll give you like my opinion on all of it. To understand how Google writes clean, maintainable code, I wrote about Google's readability process. Google's guideline for good code review would include continuous improvement over perfection. While a more seasoned developer may find a less experienced developer's code not to be up to their personal standard, Google encourages continuous improvement over perfection. Developers need to make progress. Overly difficult reviews can discourage future improvements. That's kind of funny. I had a pretty good time with like my team and the engineers I worked with. They wouldn't be like super hard on me in code reviews, but there were other people who did not have that experience. So it's kind of funny that this is like the philosophy at Google, but people did not follow it. I can tell you 100%. Some people were brutal in code reviews. I saw code reviews where there was like 100 lines of code changed and there were probably 100 comments back and forth. It must have been like a really important code base or something. Kind of goes to show not every rule is hardly followed. maintain or improve the health of the code base, follow the style guidelines. Style guidelines are pretty big at Google. There are even like readability reviewers that just adds to the review process. Also share knowledge. Reviewers are encouraged to share knowledge about language features, the code base, and other relevant artifacts through code review. Usually these guidelines are sent with supporting documentation. Yeah, this is something that was really big. With C++, if you know anything about programming languages, this is one of the harder languages to learn. And not only that, at Google, there is a very particular way of writing C++, and there are hundreds of like these tips of the week. I didn't write a lot of C++, but anytime I did or others on my team did, and there was a C++ reviewer, they would roast you or they would tell you, hey, your code kind of sucks, or this is crap, fix this. It wasn't personal because they would say like, I'm only telling you this because this is a very standard thing, and they point you to the documentation. You can read some of these. Yeah, there's a lot. You can see there's hundreds of them. So yeah, if you made a mistake, and it's really, really easy to make mistakes in C++, they would say, hey, do it this way for this reason. It's less error prone. Write small changes. This is very, very big. I've seen like memes on Twitter and stuff where you get sent pull requests with like 2,000 lines of code, then you have to review it. It's your responsibility. That's not the case at Google. If you send somebody a big ass pull request, they don't call them pull requests at Google, but if you send somebody a big ass pull request, they'll just tell you to fix it, make it smaller, and then send it to me because I'm not reviewing all that. Like, ain't nobody got time for that. They would be right because there's documentation at Google that says don't write big ass pull requests. I think that's regularly followed at Google. Sometimes it's unavoidable though. Strict standards for lightweightness. The one good thing, reviews were done pretty quickly, usually less than 24 hours. It's easy to review someone's pull request if you send small pull requests. Also, I don't know if it's going to be covered here, but when you send somebody a pull request and maybe they're not on your team or maybe they are, just giving them context on what the code is supposed to do. Like if you changed a couple hundred lines of code, I was on the front end team, so it's good to like have a screenshot. Like, okay, so this is what it looked like before and this is what it looks like after, or this is like the area of interest. That makes it pretty easy for someone to review your code. Then they automatically know like, okay, so these are the lines of code that they're changing. These are what the test should now be doing. So if you want somebody to review your code quickly so that you can do the next feature or be unblocked, it's probably good to give them that context. It's good to take extra 5 minutes, write out the description, the bullet points of what your code addressed. Politeness and professionalism, maintaining a culture of trust and respect is crucial. Reviewers should be open to author's approach, offering alternatives only if necessary, and treating each comment as a learning opportunity. Yeah, I think it's okay to disagree with your code reviewer as well, as long as you can kind of justify it. And sometimes as like a code reviewer, you will give the person the option, like, hey, I suggest you do this, but you don't have to. Or like, this is a nitpick, but maybe we should do this. There's no like super hard and fast rule, I think, in a code review. It gets open to like a dialogue. It's definitely a learning opportunity. I learned a lot through code reviews. I didn't have a lot of one-on-ones with anybody on my team. I didn't do pair programming, but when it came to like code reviews, I definitely learned a lot. And I was like eager to get comments. For a lot of people, when you get comments on your code, it kind of hurts your feelings. You take it personally. You feel like someone's attacking your code. They're attacking you. They're attacking like your ability. You're not good at coding. They're telling you you suck. I personally did not take it that way. I liked getting comments because then you know what you can improve on. If you don't get comments, you might be doing something wrong, but nobody's going to tell you. So it's good to get comments. It's good to improve. And it's good to have thick skin to the point where you're not taking it personally. It's an opportunity for you. Yeah, Google, they call them CLs rather than pull requests. They're called change lists. It's just like a word difference. I don't know why they call it that. So this is just like the approval process. So you need approval from somebody who owns part of the code base. When I first joined, I needed a readability approval. I think it was in TypeScript because that's what the Angular projects were in. But once you earn readability, meaning you've gotten good enough in TypeScript that you know like the idiomatic ways of writing it, it's pretty easy to do in my opinion, because you kind of just go based on the context. If you see TypeScript code in that directory that looks a certain way, you kind of mimic that. You're not going to make your code look completely different. So it's pretty easy to do that just based on the context. It's kind of like when you go into a new country and everybody's speaking a certain language, it's easier to pick up that way. When you're in a repo and all the code looks a certain way, it's easy to make your code match that. So I think I was able to get readability pretty quickly. And once you get readability, you don't need approval from other people, at least readability approval. This screenshot is from the SWE book. I guess that's a public book. I will say that this UI is definitely outdated, but you can kind of see the functionality. I guess I'll use like GitHub terminology. This is like the pull request. This is the author. This is the assigned reviewer. These are if any people we wanted to add to that just so they're aware of it. Bugs is like a word for tickets at Google. So if this change is addressing a ticket or fixing a ticket, you would attach the ID of that ticket there. Of course, these are like the files, and you can see the diffs between the files. I think a really good thing about Google was sometimes in a pull request, you will have like multiple back and forths. The good thing about Critique was it would show you automatically only the difference between the last pull request, so you didn't have to review all of the lines. Here you can see there's a diff against, and it says latest sync by default. That would actually be all the differences. But you can also set it to like the last change, the last revision, I think it was called. And there's a lot of other stuff here like pre-submits. You can see the cool thing about Critique, it wasn't Critique doing this, but it would show you the results of all the tests that ran. There was a lot of like automated checks. So if your code broke anything, there's a 99% chance it would get caught before it was merged. That was really, really powerful. If you had any sort of linting errors, like any errors at all, there were so many automated checks for Google to know that far before your code ended up in production. You can kind of see an example here. Your changes contain one or more proto files without a syntax statement. Each proto file must have a syntax statement in order to submit. That's just an example of a message, but yeah, it would show you like right there in the UI if your code had any sort of issues, and then you could address them. And I guess this is an example of the diff viewer. The reviewer could leave a comment. I think this isn't super exciting. The UI is pretty clean. I think the UI of this is a lot easier to use than GitHub. I think GitHub, I haven't used it a lot, but it has like multiple tabs, and I don't know why that is. Like after using Critique, it's really hard to go back to GitHub and review code there. I really don't like using GitHub at all for that. And okay, so it looks like they've added new AI-powered code review tools, and it looks like they were probably added after I left. When reviewers leave comments on code, Critique will show suggested ML-powered edits. I wonder how effective those edits are, because if they're not accurate, it would be pretty annoying. So the code review flow, you create a change, you request a change, you comment, then modify until the change is approved, and then you commit the change. So that's not unique, I think, to Google. I think that's just in general how code reviews are supposed to work. So these are just the steps of creating a change at Google. I won't go through them in depth because I don't think it's super crazy. I think this is a big thing. When you create a change at Google, before you're even allowed to request a review, there has to be a ton of automated checks that are run. Of course, the code is going to be built and like the automated tests, unit tests, I think like certain integration tests are going to be run. Style checks, of course, like linters and all that. If there's any sort of issues, extra white spaces and stuff like that, that will be like pretty easy to fix. And then you can send it to review. And there's a lot of like static analyzers. The capability at Google to implement like custom static analyzers. Those things can be included as part of pre-submits. And there's also like customization there. Like if you want certain things to be run before code can be submitted, there's so much customization at Google to do that. It's so automated. I assume there's not a single company on earth that has like the level of automation that Google does when it comes to this stuff. I was genuinely shocked at how much stuff they run before even a small piece of code can be submitted. And the amount of compute it would take to run a lot of those checks, like to build code, it's not like simple. Like there's certain projects at Google that are massive, and even to build it, it takes so much like compute resources. But of course it's worth it if it can like prevent you from deploying a bug or crashing prod or something like that. So requesting a review, pre-submits are run if they haven't already on the current snapshot, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so that needs to be run before you can request a review. And this is the UI for that. Code reviews can be anonymized. I don't think I ever took advantage of this feature. The code author wants to be anonymous. Okay, it looks like they didn't find any useful difference between this. So that would make sense why I pretty much never saw that happening. But I don't know why. Maybe if like a celebrity at Google, like Jeff Dean or somebody was doing this, they would want to be anonymous. I guess it's a feature that probably GitHub doesn't have. Stages 3 and 4, understanding and commenting on a change. I don't know how different this is from GitHub, but of course, like when you have a comment, the comment can either be unresolved or AKA open or resolved. aka closed. I think that's pretty standard. I was actually working with somebody not too long ago who was doing like some work for me when it came to neat code. We were using GitHub to like review work, and I would leave comments on his work. Something that was really annoying to me is that he didn't address the comments one by one. What I mean is, if I said, hey, can you fix X and Y? And then in another comment, I said, can you fix Z? He would sometimes make those changes, but he wouldn't tell me in the comment that, okay, I fixed X and Y. So I addressed this comment. And then he wouldn't tell me in the other comment, like, okay, I fixed this as well. That was really annoying to me. And I probably could have explained this to him. He was pretty junior. If you're a junior, my advice to you would be to be kind of courteous in that way. Like, people have manners when it comes to like social interactions. When it comes to code reviews, you want to have manners. If somebody leaves certain comments telling you to do X or Y, and then you do that, you make that change, then in that comment, you should say that. You should reply to them in that comment, okay, I made this change, and then you can close the comment or mark it resolved. Because as a reviewer, that makes it pretty easy for them to see. They have that history of you made that change and here's like the documentation for it. If you make all those changes, but you don't kind of like address the comments, then they have to like go through all your code, and then they have to go through all the comments that they made and check, okay, he fixed this part that I was asking for. Okay, now he also fixed this part. They have to like keep track of that. There's no reason for that. If the tooling, it has the capabilities for you to do that, then there's no reason to not take advantage of that. And if you make it easy for your reviewer, then you're making it easier for yourself, because then your review will be done faster. On GitHub, I think there's pretty much the same thing. And there was also this concept in Critique called like an attention set. When there's like a pull request, somebody's assigned to look at it at some point in time. When you assign it to a reviewer, it's obviously the reviewer's turn to look at it. But when the reviewer gives their feedback, it's obviously your turn to look at it and then fix the things that they said in the feedback. And that's like what the attention set was. Here in this UI, you can kind of implicitly tell this change list, this PR, the person who's in the attention set is the reviewer because their name is bold. The author is not bold. The one down here, it looks like this one was already approved. So obviously it's not the reviewer's turn to look at it. If it's already approved, it is the author, because they're the ones who are going to submit the change. As noted above, for a review to go in, it needs a approval from at least one reviewer. It needs 0 unresolved comments, though a code author can mark a comment resolved themselves in their reply. It also needs approval from the owner. Committing a change. Changes are submitted and committed within Critique itself. Critique is valuable even after changes are submitted. Google researchers found strong evidence that Critique's uses extend beyond reviewing code. Change authors use Critique to examine diffs and browse analysis tool results. In some cases, code review is part of the development process of a change. A reviewer may send out an unfinished change in order to decide how to finish the implementation. Moreover, developers also use Critique to examine the history of submitted changes long after those changes have been approved. In case there was like a change that broke production, people would go back to that submitted pull request. Sometimes one person would go to a change and be like, hey, you're the author of this change. I think this change broke production for us. And then the author would be like, oh, sorry, I guess I'll roll back the change. And another really, really good thing about Critique was you can do that right within the UI. If you wanted to roll back a commit, in many cases, you can just click a button, literally click a button, and it would create a new pull request to undo that change. And it's super, super easy, because when like production breaks, you're nervous. You don't want to be typing out commands. You might forget the command to fix production and whatnot. So let's look at the stats at Google for code reviews. Authoring frequency, it looks like 3 per week. I'm guessing that's per person. I don't know how much you guys do at your jobs. That doesn't tell us like the lines of code or the average size. 80% of authors make fewer than 7 changes per week. Usually you're coding a lot more as like a junior than you are as a senior. Review frequency, 4 changes reviewed per week. Strange that there's more reviewed than there are authored, but it makes sense because a pull request can have multiple reviewers, but only one author usually, and not a lot of time spent reviewing. I feel like these metrics are kind of useless in like a vacuum. I kind of want to compare them to what does it look like at other companies. Is the tooling saving people time? Probably is, but it's hard to know that just by looking at this. Oh, okay, so there is a comparison to other companies. The number of comments somebody receives at Google. This is pretty expected. This is probably true for most companies. When you first join, you're probably gonna get more comments. So it looks like you'd get 6 comments per change when you first join. After your first year, that's like less than half. And then it kind of still slowly goes down, but you're probably still going to be getting some amount of comments. If you were to join a company and you feel like you're getting roasted in code reviews, I think you should realize it's just part of the learning process. Over time, you'll probably be getting less comments. Assuming you're learning from the comments, you will be getting less comments. Why is critique so loved? So it looks like this is anecdotal. They just asked a few Googlers why they love critique, but for the most part, they said the static analysis tools. I think that was big on me. Static analysis, by the way, like linting is an example of that. It basically means just look at the code and tell me if there's any issues with it without necessarily running the code. It's super powerful because they're usually easy to run. They will save you a lot of time because then the reviewer doesn't have to look for those changes. The automation will do that for you. That was probably one of my favorite things as well. Focus on only the latest files changed. Yeah, that's also good because it's automatic. I think you can probably do that on GitHub too, though. I could be wrong. Side-by-side diffing interface. I think you can do that on GitHub as well, but I feel like you have to open it in a new window, or maybe you can't do it. I don't remember. It's so easy to do it in Critique. Action set, which lets people know whose turn it is. I think that is pretty good. Satisfying gamification. That's interesting. While Critique isn't built to be gamified, Googlers reported how they enjoyed it when Critique went green, which meant a PR was ready to submit. That's kind of relatable. I wonder if that is shown anywhere here. Yeah, you can't really see it here super well because it's just the color. If change is pending, it's yellow. When it's ready, it's green. Qualitative study of 88 Mozilla developers found that static analysis integration was the most commonly requested feature for code review. Automated analysis allow reviewers to focus on the understandability and maintainability of changes instead of getting distracted by trivial comments about formatting. The fact that anybody would ever leave a comment about the formatting of something is insane to me because that's the most easy to automate thing that there is. There should never be any opinions about how to format something. That should just be taken care of. While many of these features are available in other tools today, I believe it's only the tight integration and extreme personalization of the tooling towards a Google-specific workflow and code base that makes it so loved. I think that is true. It would be hard to replicate this in the open source world because at Google, like many of the tools there, nothing is isolated. Google, for example, doesn't use Docker or Kubernetes or those types of open source tools. And the reason is because they use things that are even better. They use Borg and they use other container things. And you might think, okay, well, why can't people outside of Google use Borg too? Because it's not using virtual machines. It's using bare metal. It's using a lot of stuff. And the whole aspect of containers is abstracted away from you. Also, I think their build tools feed into the container build system or whatever. I don't know a lot about it, but it would be really hard to replicate. And that's why Google doesn't use Kubernetes, because they have really, really good stuff that is hard to open source. If they could open source it and sell it, they probably would, but it's hard to, so they don't, I guess. But that was a decent read. To be honest, I didn't really learn much from it. I already kind of knew all of that stuff. It was pretty easy to understand. I think that's the whole point of newsletters these days. They just try to make it really, really easy to digest. They just put a lot of pictures and diagrams and stuff like that, and they just give you bullet lists. I think that's what this whole article was. It wasn't really paragraphs or anything. It was just a bunch of bullet points. Yeah, it was a good read, I think. I probably am not the intended audience for it.